We are back. It is episode 74 of 211's Baseball Talk. For the first time in 635 days, we are back on the airwaves on your favorite podcast platforms. We are going to talk about the Blue Jays, the World Baseball Classic, and some contract extensions. Stay with us. It all starts right after this. Well, welcome back to 211's Baseball Talk. It's been a little while, as I mentioned off the top, 635 days since we were here recording a podcast for you. How does it feel to be back?
It feels good. It's you look a little older.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Eh? You're not allowed to tell me I look older, but
no.
But 635 days, a whole pandemic later, and we're back.
In case you've forgotten, my name is Dylan Baker. I'm joined by my dad, Chris, every week for these episodes. It's great to see you again. Great to talk to you all. One of the things I noticed when I was preparing this episode was that there was actually a script written for this episode for 2021 that we just never ended up using. But here we are. We're back and we're ready to go. Let's get things rolling with the World Baseball Classic. Obviously, it's the biggest thing going on in baseball right now, aside from spring training, maybe, but you could argue the World Baseball Classic is bigger. I sure would. And Canada got their tournament started on Sunday with a big 18-8 win over Great Britain. They then got slapped around by the United States and lost 12-1. They beat Colombia 5-0 and just lost to Mexico by a score of 10-3. At the time of this recording, Canada's not done just yet, but it would take the miracle of miracles tonight in the Colombia-United States game for Canada to advance to the quarterfinals for the first time in tournament history. Obviously a young team. I mentioned on my guest spot on the Smitty Mitty show last week that I didn't really expect Canada to do much in this tournament, but you were going to get a good glimpse of the future, and I think that's what we saw.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I think Canada was actually, well, I don't want to call them impressive, because I don't think we can go that far.
Yeah, there were some less than impressive things in that tournament, but overall, I didn't think.
Well, there was a lot of disappointment. I mean, there was, Cal Quantrill was a massive disappointment. I think there was a lot of things that were expected to go well that should have gone well that didn't. But then there were also things that you would have thought would never go well, like the 19-year-old kid, Sprizzy, what's his last name? I can't remember. The kid that started against Colombia.
No, Skiro. He's not 19 though.
Isn't he? What? How old is he?
I don't know. He's in his 20s. He's in AA.
I swear somebody said he was 19. But anyway.
No, 19 was Mitch Brad, who started against the U.S.
Oh, okay. Well, that didn't go well. But what can you say about a 19-year-old trying to face a huge U.S. juggernaut? Anyway, I think that there were some surprising things that did go well that a lot of people didn't think would, and so that helped Canada at least have a fighting chance if Colombia can win tonight against the United States. But and even then, it doesn't sound like it's totally guaranteed. There has to be a pretty big run differential, doesn't there?
Yeah. So the tiebreaker now, let's say Colombia wins that game. And obviously by the time this episode is out, it'll be tomorrow. It'll be Thursday. Everyone will know the results. So we'll just go through it for our sake. For Canada to make it to the quarterfinals, they would need a Colombian blowout, because the tiebreaker in a three-way tie, since none of those three teams have beaten both of their opponents in that scenario, the tiebreaker would be the lowest quotient of runs allowed divided by defensive innings. And Canada has allowed a lot of runs. I mentioned it off the top of this segment, where they gave up 8 in the first game against Great Britain, 12 against the United States. The shutout against Colombia helped, but then giving up 10 today to Mexico, less than ideal. Canada gave up double-digit runs in 2 of their 4 games. So it would take, like I said, the miracle of all miracles tonight between Colombia and the United States to move on for Canada. It's not impossible, but it's highly likely that was the last game Canada plays in this tournament.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate, but at the same time, I think it's kind of what we all expected. They'd probably end up just, barely surviving this first round, and they kind of did. I don't think there was anything to be overly disappointed in. I mean, certainly you and I have talked about it many times that the roster was not overly impressive. There were some good guys on there. Owen Casey impressed. Lots of impressive performances for what we thought they were going to get, but we certainly didn't expect anything major or that they would get to the next round. So, kudos to Canada and kudos to the team. They did cobble together because obviously they made a run at it, and what else can you say? They've qualified for the next one. That's all they need. Hopefully we get a stronger roster in 4 years.
Yeah, you know what? I think that they surpassed my expectations of the team. I expected a win against Great Britain and then losses to Colombia, Mexico, and the US, but they beat Colombia. They kept it close against Mexico for a lot of that game up until it wasn't, and Canada ran out of pitching depth. But, for me, the biggest thing that separated Canada from their opponents in this group, in particular Mexico, is the lack of pitching depth. I mean, even the first two starters in this tournament for Team Canada gave them a combined inning of work. Cal Quantrill threw 2/3 and Mitch Bratt only got through a third of an inning. And again today, I mean, Rob Zastryzny did what he could, but he didn't get through. He got through, I think, 2 innings, allowed 3 runs. So not ideal for your starting pitcher. There wasn't much behind the starters even then. Noah Skiro started yesterday or against Colombia yesterday at the time of this recording, and he pitched really well. And then out of the bullpen, they were able to finagle a win and a scoreless win at that. But when it came down to it and Canada needed arms to shut the door, they didn't get that. And that was evidenced once again today when they were in a very close game against the Mexicans. They were up, they were down 3-2, and then Mexico just blew them out of the water.
Yeah. Yeah. And that big score, as you said, is really now kind of put the writing on the wall here.
But yeah, if Canada lost this game by a score of 2-1, and then maybe Colombia, big blowout victory against the US 10-3, maybe by this score, then things could change a little bit. There's more of a chance, but for Canada right now, there's really no shot. Before we move on to the tournament as a whole, instead of focusing just on Canada, give me one guy from Team Canada that really caught your eye in this tournament that impressed you.
I'm gonna go with Owen Casey. I didn't know much about him heading into this, and there was lots of good performances here and there. Otto Lopez had an impressive game. Originally, that's who I was going to give it to, but I think I'd give it overall to Owen Casey. I think it was the most consistent performance. I don't think there was anything that dazzled, but at the same time, he had consistency even in games where they were getting blown out. So that's where I'm going with it.
Yeah, Casey obviously hit the home run in game 1 against Great Britain to dead center field. Takes a lot of pop to get it out there. A talented youngster, Chicago Cubs prospect, Owen Casey. My player is Edouard Julien. Edouard Julien hit leadoff the entire tournament for Team Canada. I had never heard the name Edouard Julien until he got on the field for Team Canada in this tournament. He was in AA last year for the Minnesota Twins. Just a fantastic performance by him. He was good defensively, but where he stood out was the offense. He was constantly setting the tone for the Team Canada lineup. He was getting on base early. He had a great feel for the strike zone, and he had tons of pop. He had over 500 in the tournament. An all-around great performance for Edouard Julien. And they mentioned it on the broadcast of the Canada-Mexico game, Rich Waltz and Buck Martinez, who, by the way, did a phenomenal job throughout this pool play. I loved hearing those two broadcast the tournament. But one of the things that they said was they wouldn't be surprised if Edouard Julien sees big league time this year, and I am right there with them because he was impressive. I said this would be the last thing, but I want one more little question for you. Mitch Bratt starting against the United States. 19-year-old kid, hasn't pitched over above single A. What did you think of that call from Canada manager Ernie Whitt?
Well, I think I don't think it was the right call, but at the same time, I don't know who else I would go with. You can't predict anybody in that road. I mean, you mentioned it earlier, not even just the rotation, the entire pitching staff. I don't know if you could predict anybody other than Cal Quantrill, and that prediction went south pretty fast. So, I guess my answer to the question is I don't know how you make a better decision than that. I really don't. I mean, when you look at that list of who you got and who you're going to go with, there just wasn't anybody that I would say, oh, he really should have gone with this guy, because really, I don't know that there was a case for that at all. So, that's where I'm at too. I mean, I completely agree with you. I think,
hindsight being 2020, you could say, oh, what a terrible call to use Mitch Bratt, 19-year-old against this star-studded lineup. But Mitch Bratt had great numbers in single A last year. Mitch Bratt is, nobody could have predicted that Noah Skiro was going to pitch as well as he did against Columbia because this pitching staff was so volatile. You mentioned it, Cal Quantrill, really the only guy that you could have come into the tournament and said he's probably going to have a good performance. And he didn't against Great Britain of all teams, who scored 3 on him in the first inning. And he didn't even finish that first inning. So, I mean, the pitching staff was less than impressive for Team Canada. But I put none of that on Mitch Bratt in that outing. I don't know what the poor guy was supposed to do. Huge start for him. Never pitched above A ball. Pitches under the bright lights, primetime game in the United States, on Fox nationally in the U.S., and he's got to deal with that lineup. I mean, really a tough task for him. And listen, you said it there. Who else are you going to go with? Because coming into the tournament, you got no idea what that pitching staff is going to look like aside from Cal Quantrill. Let's talk more about the tournament as a whole. The shows that were put on by the Tokyo Dome in Japan, the fans in Japan, by the fans in Taiwan, the fans in Miami, in those games between the Dominican and Venezuela and Puerto Rico, even Nicaragua had quite the showing in terms of fan support there. And Arizona, the Mexican fans came out in full force. I mean, this has been a real success, I feel, for Major League Baseball and for baseball as a whole across the world with the fan support that we've seen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's been a great World Baseball Classic. You and I were talking about last night. This is the one we've watched the most games in. We've watched a lot of the World Baseball Classics early on in the past and kind of just lost interest really quickly. I think baseball's done a really good job at keeping it interesting. I would have liked to see the pitch clock in this one. I'm really starting to get used to that and really liking these shorter games. I've heard some interesting opinions on that. I'm sure we'll get into it, but
we will.
But I mean, the pitch clock could have been nice there to just shorten up some of these games. But I think that overall, it's been a heck of a World Baseball Classic with some Cinderella stories that have been fun to watch, and to see the Czech Republic get in automatically to the next one's pretty cool. So lots of different good stories that I think baseball should be pretty proud of.
Absolutely. Let's talk a little bit about the Czech Republic and Great Britain and Nicaragua. Nicaragua obviously didn't manage to win a game, but they did still put on a pretty good show. Came very close to beating Israel in that game. Israel scored in the 8th inning to take the lead, and they held on to that. So these smaller countries making their first appearances in the World Baseball Classic. You talk about the Czechs, you talk about Great Britain as well. I mean, really, really impressive stuff from those smaller countries. The Czech Republic's clinched themselves a spot in the next tournament. They did not finish last in their group, as many would have expected them to. China did. So China will have to requalify for the next World Baseball Classic in 2026. But the Czech Republic will be back. They've got a spot guaranteed. That's awesome. Great Britain, if the U.S. wins tonight, and obviously we'll know by the time this is out, but at the time of this recording, we have no idea. If the U.S. beats Colombia, Great Britain has a spot in 2026, and Colombia has to requalify. The emergence of these smaller countries, the tournament expanded this year. Just to remind everybody, the tournament expanded. There are more teams in the tournament this year, 4 more teams, and that's given the chance for these smaller countries like a Great Britain, or smaller baseball countries, I should say, like a Great Britain, like a Nicaragua, like a Czech Republic to shine, and it's been great to see.
It really has. It really, really has. And, seeing some of these allegiances too, to, parents' original countries and parents' original countries and things like that has been kind of fun too. To see some players not just playing for the U.S. or not just playing for a North American team, but finding their heritage a little bit and going to some of these other teams. You and I were laughing to see Eric Sogard in the Czech Republic, and I thought that was really cool, and just really awesome opportunities for him to kind of teach these guys who we all laugh across the entire baseball world about the fact that they all have normal jobs, and they were the only team really that had that, and it was just really, really a great story.
Yeah, no, absolutely it was. What does this do for the growth of the game across the world? We saw that clip. I don't know if everybody who was listening was watching the game between Mexico and Great Britain on Tuesday night, I should say. But there was the clip of the class that's gone around social media, the class in Great Britain that was celebrating Harry Ford's home run for Great Britain to win that game against Colombia. What is a tournament like this, and the way that it's gone, how does this impact the growth of the game around the world?
I think I think overall this really expanded baseball's ability to reach across the globe, and they needed to. They needed to. I mean, it's not just a North American sport. I shouldn't even say anymore. It never has just been a North American sport, but it's just not been acknowledged as a worldwide sport until now. You can't play in the Olympics because the Major League Baseball players can't play in the Olympics, so that's not
And
as
that would
exciting.
make
And
it
so you
not best
might
on best competition, right? If there's no Major League Baseball players in the tournament, it's not the best baseball players from each country facing off.
exactly. Well, that's exactly it. I mean, there's a huge piece to that with the World Baseball Classic. Is it as big as the World Cup of Soccer? No. Will it ever be? Probably not. But it is going to get bigger, and I would say this one even proved that it's probably the biggest of all. There was a 6-year hiatus, and I understand that too because of the COVID pandemic. But there was certainly a vibe to and still is a vibe to this World Baseball Classic that I don't think they've had before, and I think it's done wonders for baseball.
Well, you mentioned the 6-year gap there, and a lot of times that can really hurt events like this where people kind of forget about it. It goes on the back burner, but I think it's had the opposite effect. I think people have been craving this kind of competition, and it makes me wonder, and this is a whole different thing, and I won't spend too much time on it, but it makes me wonder why hockey doesn't have something like this where there's a best on best competition, because the last couple of Olympics, NHL players haven't gone to the Olympics. There hasn't been a World Cup of hockey since 2014. Fans want best on best. This, or 2016, I should say, for the World Cup of hockey. But fans want best on best. They want to see things like this, and this is what helps grow the game across the world. So I would really like more sports to dive into this. For the NBA, they can participate in the Olympics because that's not part of their season yet. Like the Summer Olympics occur in August, as you mentioned. That's in the off season for the NBA. So the best players can go over there and play in the Olympic Games. But for a sport like baseball, they can't do that. Hockey, they're hesitant to do that. So create a best on best event and have the players participate in it. And it's been great for Major League Baseball and for baseball as a whole in this tournament. Before we move on to spring training, I want to get your favorite non-Canada moment or aspect of this World Baseball Classic.
Well, for that, I'm going to need shareability, Dylan. So if you can, for our viewers, if you can, people who have decided to watch this instead of listen to it, and if you haven't, go on and watch, because I'm going to share, the biggest moment that I think is finding what Meeper from the Muppets is doing in retirement. And we found him.
Goodness.
The World Baseball Classic.
You've got a chance to share here.
All right. So everybody ready for this big reveal? We have found what Meeper is doing.
Okay.
Now.
You can't say that about Ernie Witt.
Hey, Ernie's great. He would laugh at this. He just had the Meeper face going. Look at that. Look at that. The great comparison there, I think. But Meeper has been found in his retirement.
This is a Canada moment. What's your non-Canada moment?
Well, it's a non-baseball Canada moment. This is just a general.
All right, give me
something
that's not related to Canada. That was your favorite aspect of the World Baseball Classic this year.
Well, I think my favorite aspect of the World Baseball Classic was actually the timing of the games. That seems weird, not the timing in play, but the actual time of the game. A lot of these 3:00, 10:00 games were easy to watch. They were easy to sit down and find. Everybody was playing at a time I felt like I could watch. There were a couple of early morning games, obviously, but that I did not get a chance to watch. But this is the one where I've been able to watch the most, and it's a little after the workday, or it's just at the end of the workday, and then there's another game, and then there's another game after that, and you're still at a reasonable bedtime. It's really cool. I think they did a great job with the timing of all the games, and so while that's not a baseball play or anything like that as a favorite, that allowed me more access to baseball, and I give kudos to them for that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. It was completely off of my board in terms of favorite moments of the World Baseball Classic, but they did schedule it really well. You had baseball game one after the other, really, throughout the day. So you never really had a time. For us, we're in the Eastern time zone, right? So we had a game at noon, a game at 3, a game at 7, and a game at 10. And that was fantastic. Like, you could watch so much baseball. And for me personally, being in high school, this is March break, right? And I get to sit at home and enjoy my time off and watch baseball all day. Like, that's fantastic. That was a really good job by Major League Baseball in that scheduling. And I'm glad you brought that up because I had no plans of doing it, but that's an underrated aspect of this tournament. My favorite thing, non-Canada related in the World Baseball Classic this year, it's got to be the emergence of the Czech Republic and Great Britain. I mean, these are two countries who nobody expected to do anything really in this tournament. They both managed to win a game. They both looked like they were having such a great time, just enjoying the moment, and really representing their countries well on the world stage. So those are my favorite aspects of the World Baseball Classic this year. Moving on to Major League Baseball this week, Kiebert, Ruiz, and Corbin, Carroll signed some big contract extensions. Kiebert Ruiz, a young catcher with the Washington Nationals, who has just over a year of service time, and Corbin Carroll, a center fielder with the Arizona Diamondbacks, one of their top prospects, less than half a year of service time. I had to look this one up because I was curious. Less than half a year of service time for Corbin Carroll, but he gets this big contract extension, actually bigger than that of Kiebert Ruiz, and he is now locked up to be an Arizona Diamondback for quite a few years. This is something that we've seen recently. We've seen this emerge. You think back to Ronald Acuna Jr. and Ozzie Albies when they first came up for the Atlanta Braves. They made sure that they inked these guys to contract extensions while they were young, and Julio Rodriguez got one as well mid-season last year, and this year, obviously, Kiebert Ruiz and Corbin Carroll getting preseason contract extensions. What do you think of this? We'll talk about the Blue Jays, and we'll bring that up in a second. But overall, from a baseball perspective, what do you think of these extensions?
Well, I think that Alex Anthopoulos strikes again and changes baseball. I mean, because that is an Atlanta Braves move. I mean, that is
the first guy to do it.
That's where it started, and good for Double-A, because that is I think a great opportunity for these kids playing to lock up their futures. To it's risk, but everybody takes on risk. These guys take off, and they're going to probably be worth a lot more than these contracts. So they're somewhat team friendly. They're also friendly to the player if they don't pick up as much as is expected. I think they're great contracts. I think it was great to see Bo Bichette get a smaller one. But these ones are interesting, and I think this is interesting for the Washington Nationals. This is a team that can never extend anybody. They have never had success extending anyone, and now
Ryan Zimmerman would beg to differ.
That's true. Okay, but 90% of their players tend to be Boras clients, and we know that Scott Boras just doesn't do that. So for the Nationals to get another player extended aside from Zimmerman, I think is huge for them. This is huge for the Diamondbacks, obviously, as well. Again, a big risk with not having that much service time, but at the same time, you have to look at the CBA, and this is definitely a CBA-related move too, in a way, because you have these phantom raises and different things you can give guys now for having good years, or need to give guys now for having good years. You get away from all of that by extending them right out to free agency. So and you get the things that happened to Manoah. That's not happening now for these guys, right? And not that Manoah was terrible, but it was not. He probably deserved a little more, and then you get into the whole argument thing, and it's just not worth it. Why not extend them right through to their free agency and maybe a year or two into it, and eliminate all of that? I think it's great.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You mentioned the risk involved at the beginning of your argument there, the risk that's involved for both sides, because for the players, obviously most of the time this buys into a couple of years of free agency. I think the deal for Ruiz and Carroll, I think they both got 8 years. So that would take away 2 of your free agency years. So you could be missing out on a little bit of extra money if you went to free agency at your scheduled time. But there's lots of risk for the team as well, because you're committing a lot of money to guys who haven't really proven it in the big leagues. But it kind of works out. It tends to work out. There are lots of examples of this paying dividends for these teams. The Arizona Coyotes in the National Hockey League tried this not long ago with their young players, and I mean they swung and missed on pretty much all of them. But in baseball, the success rate seems to be a little bit higher, and it's been fantastic for these teams. And like you mentioned, the CBA stuff I feel doesn't get brought up enough when it comes to these extensions, because there's arbitration. You avoid that with these deals. There's all sorts of incentives. You avoid that with these deals. There's service time manipulation. Like if they sign Corbin Carroll and Kiebert Ruiz before they even came up to the big leagues, right? Before these guys played a game, I think Acuna signed his before he even played a game in the big leagues. You do that, and you don't have to manipulate the service time, because they're not going to be reaching free agency any earlier, right? They're still going to be reaching free agency at the same time because of this extension that you signed with them. So that kind of avoids that issue that's been pretty relevant when it comes to CBA negotiations over the past couple of years. The other thing is that I wanted to bring up with this topic before we move on, as we shift towards the Toronto Blue Jays, which is where we'll spend the rest of the podcast. Do you think the Jays should have done this? I mean, obviously hindsight, is 2020. It's easy to say. Obviously Vladdy's had a great career. Bo Bichette's had a great career. Should the Jays have done this? Probably, I think. But at the time, could you have predicted this? Maybe, maybe not. What do you think?
Well, it was a tougher call with Vladdy, I think. Even though Bo gets questioned on defense a lot, he hits more than anyone else in the league, essentially. So that one I would have said, and he was doing that all through the minors. There was no surprise there. He hasn't had the sophomore slump, nothing like that. So from a hitting perspective, Bo Bichette showed, I think, that he needed an extension even longer than he got.
Well, he's not
it should have been
extended.
done
They just
longer.
bought out his arbitration years, right? Like this is not
Right, exactly.
any added time for the Blue Jays, which is unfortunate, but you don't have to go to arbitration with him every year.
No, and that'll keep the relationship nice and solid, and hopefully they can work something out. But the concern I have is with Vladdy. I mean, you probably could have got a pretty team-friendly deal after that slower year. Even I guess last year wasn't that slow, but when he had that slower year before 2021, you could probably have gotten something pretty team-friendly done. And but again, I guess how do you count 2020 as a real season? It's tough. It's tough to really say, but I think they should have made a bigger effort to do it, if that's what you're asking.
Yeah, and I think they mentioned there were questions about it because when the Jays brought up Bichette and Guerrero and Biggio for that matter in 2019, that was a year after the Braves extended Acuna and Albies. So people were saying, "Oh, did you try to do this, Ross? Did you look to extend these guys?" And he said, "Yeah, we talked about it, but that's what any GM's going to say. If they did talk about it, great. Maybe the players just didn't want to settle for the amount of money that was offered, and that's fine because the team can just say, well, you haven't proven anything in the big leagues yet, so why should we give you this money? You either take it or leave it at the number that it's at." It would have been nice to have for sure for the Blue Jays, but at the moment, or at the time, sorry, I should say, you don't know whether these guys are going to pan out. Obviously, Vladdy, number one prospect, but there were concerns.
Well, but that's the risk.
Yeah.
Right. That's the risk. I mean, I find that Ross Atkins is a little risk averse in some ways. I know this also has Mark Shapiro and ownership on it too. But it is something that, you have to take on some of that risk. And Shapiro talks about it all the time. He's not oblivious to it. He talks about taking on extra risk here and there, right? But it's something I think that they maybe missed the boat with on these two.
Yeah. Let's stay on the topic of the Blue Jays, running out of time here. What are your thoughts on the new guys so far in spring training? Jays have obviously had a pretty successful spring. You look at guys like Dalton Varsho, even having the first spring with Whit Merrifield, Kevin Kiermaier in town, Chris Bassett as well. What have your thoughts been, your first impressions of these new guys the Jays acquired?
I'm impressed. I mean, we don't have a situation so far in spring training where we go, why did they acquire this guy? Right. And we usually do. There's usually one fringe acquired guy that we like. Even Kikuchi last year was I'm so excited to see him doing well. But I mean, like, there's nobody that really stands out as, God, why did they do that? And to hear Kiermaier love the Blue Jays like he does, it's hilarious. I mean, you hear it over and over and over again. And that's awesome. And I think, if we can get him to stay for longer than a year, I think they should. Again, a little injury prone, so we'll see what happens this year first. But again, I don't think there's anybody on there that they've added that I go, ugh. And Bassett's been awesome. So again, spring training, spring numbers, but so far so good.
Yeah, no, I've loved having these new acquisitions. You think of a guy like Chris Bassett. We got Manoah in the big leagues. Bassett's going to be a great influence for him, a guy who takes everything very seriously. He's a big competitor, and when you bring somebody like Ricky Tiedemann up to the big leagues, he'll be a huge influence on him as well. So great pickup there. I love Dalton Varsho. I think, as long as the bat is there, Varsho is going to be a steal for the Blue Jays because he plays a fantastic left field, right field, center field. He can catch even wherever you want to put him. He's going to play well, and as long as that bat is there, it's going to be worth giving up the first prospect in your prospect pool, which is what they did, trading Gabriel Moreno away. A guy I didn't mention off the top, Eric Swanson, who was acquired in the Teoscar Hernandez trade. He's looked good in spring training as well. So a lot of good signs for the Blue Jays, a lot of positives in terms of the new acquisitions so far this spring. We'll talk about some potential positional battles next week on the show, but for now, we're going to stay away from that. We'll move on to the pitch clock, the new rules, the bigger bases, the no shifting. What have your first impressions been of all this stuff? What do you think? Because obviously it's pretty different.
I like it. I didn't know if I would. I am a big traditionalist, as you know, and I'm also very stubborn, as you know even better. You've grown up with me around. But you know, take the stubbornness away. I like it. Especially the pitch clock. It is unbelievable the difference it is making in game times.
Yeah, no, the pitch clock has been a huge difference maker in the time of game. It's been shortened by half an hour. The pace is so much better. You don't lose focus as much. You've got to be watching the game, right? You got to be paying attention to keep up. You know, at times in the past, you could sit there on your phone, kind of be looking up, okay, strike one. You look, you scroll Twitter a little bit. Ken Rosenthal tweets something, you look back up, strike two. But now you do that, you've missed two pitches. Right? Like this time that you're spending away from the game, you can't have that anymore. It's keeping people invested more. I'm a big baseball fan. Everybody around me knows it. I've been the biggest baseball fan a lot of people have known since I was a kid, just friends at school and stuff. You know, even I have to adjust to this because I want to be locked in. Like, I don't want to miss a pitch of the game. And so that means that you're going to have to change your viewing experience just a little bit. I love the pitch clock so much. I think this is a great ad for Major League Baseball. I'm so happy it's here. And I was skeptical too, but I think it's worked out great. We've seen an increase in stolen base attempts as well, which I wasn't so sure we would with the bigger bases, but it seems to have worked out as well. I love steals. I love excitement like that. So I think at least in spring training and the added pitch comm stuff where the pitcher can call the pitches, everything seems to be going pretty well for Major League Baseball with these rule changes, at least so far.
Well, they tested them, and that's I think the greatest. You know, it's
for years, not just 1 year. It's been around. Pitch clock's been around 5 years in the minor leagues.
Exactly, and not only that, it's evolved from a pitch clock to a pace of play clock, a pace clock, because it's now involving the batters, which I think is great too. Get in the box. You know, are there some unfair mistakes umpires are making? Yeah. I mean, in the Jays game there the other day, I forget who it was, but you know, the umpire was picking up baseballs. So he just
Nathan Lucas got victimized by that.
Nathan Lucas, umpires picking up baseballs, and so he just assumed that the pitch clock wasn't mattering at that moment, and it still was. The umpire got back and called him for a strike. That's ridiculous, but that's going to be part of the learning process. But so there's the pace clock. It involves the batters, which I think is brilliant. And then there's the stealing. And what I like is the less than a couple moves over to first base. It's increased back picks. Danny Jansen's been great at it this spring and doing that. And the back picks are always fun to watch. There's nothing better than a good back pick. And I think fans that don't know what that is are going to really get to enjoy that now, because really the pitcher can't throw over as much. So, but who can? Well, it's the catcher. And if you can get the opportunity to get that back pick, go for it. So, I mean, there's risk of throwing it down the line, and we'll see a lot of that, I'm sure too. But again, you know, I still think we're going to see more back picks just simply from that. And I think that creates excitement as well. So I love the new rules. I think it's so far so good.
Not only with the bigger bases increasing the stealing, but you mentioned the fewer pickoff moves there. Once a pitcher is at 2 pickoff moves, that runner can take huge leads because they know that the third one, they've got to get him out or else he's got the base anyway, right? So this is
unless you back pick him, right?
Unless you back pick him, yeah. So that'll increase the back picks. We've got less than 4 minutes here, so let's go over the Rogers Center renovations quickly and the $20 tickets that they're offering. What do you think of that?
Brilliant. I love it. I hope nobody just goes and steals people's seats. That's my only concern with that.
My counter to that will be that there's going to be security at every section anyway, and they'll check the tickets and say, okay, no, you don't have a ticket for this. You've got the general admission. You can go to any restaurant in the outfield. You can go anywhere you want in the outfield, but you can't come here.
Yeah, well, and it's fine for them to go in anywhere in the concourse, essentially, but yeah, they can't go down into the stands, and you know, I'm sure they'll be less against it when, you know, the 500 level's not full and somebody wants to go sit in an empty seat. That's different, but I just would hate for somebody to take a $20 ticket and steal a front row seat but again, that's just me and conspiracy theorying this whole thing. But But at the same time, I think that, as you say, I think if the ushers are ready and everybody's trained well, I think that's a great offering, especially for low-income individuals too, who get a chance to just come to a game. The experience looks like it's going to be so much better. Rogers Center looks awesome in its designs, and I can't wait to see it in person.
Think of all the students in Toronto too, going to Toronto Metropolitan University, going to University of Toronto, going to York. Like, they can afford these tickets. That's huge. And I love this move by the Blue Jays. I love the renovations. It's going to have a completely different vibe to it next year. It's going to look great. One last thing I want to touch on before we go for episode 74 to 11's baseball talk. They mentioned it today. Vladdy back in the lineup today for the Blue Jays after the knee injury. He says he's not opposed to going to the World Baseball Classic, joining the Dominican, if they can beat Puerto Rico tonight. And obviously we'll know by tomorrow. But if they make it to the next round, he's open to going as long as the knee feels good. You're Ross Atkins. You're John Schneider. What do you say?
I understand and I respect it. I wouldn't like it. And that's all I would say is I would let him know I don't like the idea. I'd probably still let him go. It's only a couple more games potentially. But it is, again, with a knee that was a little tweaked, I'm not sure you really want him going. And I hope he makes the right decision, but to me would be not to go. But again, with it only being a couple games, maybe. But yeah, I'd probably discourage it.
Well, there is risk associated with it. It was just some minor knee inflammation, but you don't want to re-aggravate a knee injury. So I get what you're saying. It would be really cool to see Vladdy representing the Dominican Republic. That guy is exciting every single night. Imagine him on a big stage representing his country. I mean, that's the stuff of dreams. That's why the World Baseball Classic exists, and that's why it is so popular. That's going to do it for episode 74 of 211's Baseball Talk. Thank you all so much for tuning in once again. It feels really good to be back, and we'll be back next Thursday talking to you more about spring training and anything that comes up in the next week, including the World Baseball Classic champion. Thank you all for listening. We'll talk to you again very soon.